Hello and welcome to the 16th episode of Unlimited Opinions. I'm Adam Bishop.
I'm Mark Bishop.
And we finally figured out how to work a microphone over on the other side of the room.
By we, I think you're implying it was me. It dawned on me as we were getting set up that I've had my microphone backwards for most of these episodes.
So I've been struggling, like turning up his levels way higher than mine, trying to figure out why his mic was quieter than mine. The reason was he had it backwards. So if he has ever been quiet, it's because his microphone was backwards.
Well, now you can hear me crystal clear. Can you hear me? This is awesome. I feel like I'm a radio professional.
I think we are far from being professional here.
Well, I guess it depends if someone would pay us.
That's very true. Today we're talking about metaphysics. But before we begin,
I had a sticker book when I was a kid. That reminds me of it. And I was amused. I was in the 6th grade, and I was so amused by this one sticker that said, "This sticker is worth $1 million if you can find someone stupid enough to pay it," which is really, really brilliant in its own way.
Also, I found out you have a knack for interrupting me right as I say before we begin. That is always, every single time. That's exactly when you interrupt me.
All right, what were we saying?
So I say, before we begin, I'd like to, as always, plug the Unlimited Opinions Twitter at capital U, lowercase LMTD, capital O, opinions. And again, our t-shirt competition is still going.
It's still alive.
Which is good because
we don't have
a t-shirt designed yet.
I'm working on it.
That competition is still going. So the person who tweets this, the most thought-provoking or interesting thing, or right now anything at all, because nobody has tweeted at us, will win a free Unlimited Opinions t-shirt.
That is correct.
Yes. All right. Should we begin?
I thought we already started.
No, I meant talk about.
Oh yes, talk about chapter. Well, it's chapter 6 in this part, I guess. Metaphysics.
Metaphysics.
In the Middle Ages.
Yes.
Go.
All right, so first we start off with Avicenna on being, essence, and existence. And he kind of starts off with trying to determine what actually metaphysics is, because you had Aristotle way back when saying that there's two parts of metaphysics, basically understanding God and understanding being, were the two major parts of metaphysics. And Avicenna kind of kicks out the God portion of it, because he says that no science demonstrates the existence of its own subjects, so God is not the subject of metaphysics, because he believes that you can only really prove the existence of God through metaphysics.
I don't know that that's necessarily true. Do you agree with that?
Well, can you prove, like, chemistry exists by chemistry?
Yes. How else could you do it?
I don't know.
I mean, isn't chemistry the study of the... Well, I don't even know how to define it. I guess the study of interaction of different chemicals, right? Yeah. I guess. And how would you... what other way would you define it than the study in itself?
I have absolutely no idea.
Yeah, see, I thought I was kind of trying to wrap my head around that, but in any event, so he conveniently excludes a large subject matter for this discussion.
Yes,
and it's I guess this is a Western philosophy book and not a theology book, so. The author, of course, is focusing on the philosophical underpinnings, even with regard to religious type ideas, yes. And not necessarily dogma.
Yes,
which is just you believe it because you're supposed to.
Mm-hmm. So then Avicenna kind of goes on. He says that being is the object of metaphysics because, of course, doesn't need proof. That's kind of why he thinks that. I don't know if that's how sciences are determined, because they can't prove themselves, I guess, is what he's saying. I know you look confused. That's just back to what you were saying.
I didn't understand what you were saying. That's why I was confused.
Because being...
I'm going to take a drink out of my Hobbit mug.
Lord of the Rings, yes. Lord of the Rings fancy mugs that came from the Ukraine.
I did not know they were coming from the Ukraine. They're handmade, and they're large.
Yes, they're very large.
They're
big.
Yes.
Yes, big mugs. Yeah, but he was basically saying that being doesn't need proof. You don't need proof that being exists, that being is a thing. And that is why being is kind of the object of metaphysics, because as he was saying, the object of a science cannot be that which is proved by itself. And because being needs no proof of itself, that's why being is the object of metaphysics.
I guess because being is.
Yes.
Which is just another way of saying being.
Yes.
Kind of it's self-definitional, I guess.
And kind of with that, he says that there's these few ideas that are just imprinted on the soul that we don't really have like proof for. We just know that they exist. And those are thing, being, and necessary. And those are the three concepts that we all have. So I guess what he's kind of saying here is like I can look around the room and I can point to all the things without stating what exactly a thing is. I just know that they all are things. I know that they all that they all exist because that is just evident to me. I know that they are there and that they are necessary because by their existence it is necessary for them to exist. So we know that it is necessary for them to exist because they do.
I don't know why that has to be imprinted on my soul. I think it just means that it is something that is in existence in our mind before we were born, I guess.
Yes.
Something
Something that doesn't really need to be taught to us, I guess.
Yeah, I guess that's the way it is. It's stating the obvious. So
yeah.
So if it's, I guess that's what he's saying. I mean, I don't know why there has to be. You see this time and again where they say, "Well, this was provided to you by Creator before you were born, and it was in existence before you were born." I don't know why that had to be. I mean, I guess those same concepts were imprinted upon our dog before our dog's soul, because a dog knows that things are here, and they can be aware of their existence, and that those things exist because they exist. So I don't see that as.
Can a dog reason through all that?
I think a dog knows when something's there.
Well, yeah, a dog can tell that things exist.
Yes, and it knows the difference between things.
Yes.
So what else is there?
Does it know that it is necessary for them to exist?
Well, yeah. Have you ever played that trick on a dog that...
yeah, that's actually a great point where you pretend to throw the ball.
Oh, well, I was going to say that you hold a blanket up in front of you.
Oh, well, that
and you play
too.
peekaboo, and then all of a sudden you stand behind some doorway. Oh my God, where'd that human go?
I guess it also applies to, throwing a ball, but
You
pretending
trick
to throw it behind the back. Because
Yes.
it's like they think it's necessary. Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
I just see that as he's just restating the obvious and saying it's imprinted on your soul. Well, I guess maybe the obvious is imprinted on all our souls. If you're conscious of and aware of your surroundings, it's just a different way of saying that you're
conscious and aware of your surroundings.
Yes.
I guess.
And I think dogs are to a large degree.
Mm-hmm.
I think less separates us from dogs than most people think.
Yeah, I guess.
And I think in a lot of ways it's not complementary to us.
Yeah.
The qualities that we have that differentiate us from dogs are not necessarily favorable to us.
But we kind of get into those types of qualities just a little bit later with Aquinas. So
let's go.
Yeah, let's have that
All right.
discussion.
I'm sorry, I didn't mean to bog you down.
I'm not saying
with my
that.
deep thoughts about dogs.
So then Avicenna kind of points to these two types of being. And it's similar to what we've heard in the past, that there are necessary beings and possible beings.
Yeah, the potentiality and the actuality.
Yes, that sort of deal. So that they are necessary in that they do exist, they have to exist because they do. And it is possible being is that there is no necessity for them to exist right now, but they will exist at some point.
It is possible I will take a sip out of my Hobbit mug.
Just as I'm doing
my Lord
right
of the
now.
Rings mug. And then it's actual when it happens.
Yes, exactly.
Don't slurp.
I didn't. And so then Avicenna kind of goes on to talk about universality.
We should probably be clear that you are drinking iced tea.
Yes, I'm not
As a
drinking
reminder.
ale as we're talking right now.
Although if we're in Europe, you could.
That's true. We are not in Europe.
I am drinking an ale. I think it's an ale.
So then Avicenna kind of moves on to the concept of universality, and he says that basically universality is apparent across many things. And so he kind of uses, this is where he talks about horseness, basically what makes a horse a horse. And so he kind of uses...
It's a horse, of course.
It's funny.
What's a horse? I forget what that's from a movie, isn't it? Is it from the Marx Brothers?
I think it might be. It sounds like a Marx Brothers thing. Yes, but he kind of says that...
Go ahead.
He's
Please
just
continue.
repeating that.
I'm trying to
remember it.
to remember the whole song.
Yeah, so he talks about hoarseness, and kind of like hoarseness is universal to all things, but hoarseness really isn't a thing in and of itself. There's no like separate hoarseness out in the world. There's just the commonalities between all horses that make them a horse, and that is what constitutes hoarseness.
Yes.
Yes. And then he talks about humanity, and humanity is kind of different in this sense.
According to him.
In that other things need other basically qualities to individualize them. Like, so horse would need different qualities from another horse to make it apparent that it is a different horse in a way. But he says that humanity in and of itself, humanity being humanity in its universal state, is already individuated. Because for humanity to exist, there has to be this understanding that there is an individual who is human, right? Because humans are very individual. We are very different from each other in just about every way. Not every way, but, personality and thought-wise, we are very, very different from each other. And that's kind of like the distinction between humans and animals that I think Avicenna is making here, in that we humans basically don't operate just on instinct, but we have our own sort of goals and desires, and that's kind of what makes humanity in and of itself necessary to be individuated. You don't need separate qualities like brown horse versus white horse, or horse in this location versus this location. Simply by being human, we are our own individuals because we operate basically on a higher level than other animals.
I agree with his concept. I do not agree with the distinction between animals for the reason I said earlier. Every dog has its own personality, and I think they have their own goals and desires in some ways. Not as maybe as complex or over time, long-term goals. Horses, I think, I've never had a horse, but it's my understanding they all have their own individual personality too. So I think I agree with his assessment of humans being individuals, but we of course, especially nowadays, or maybe of course back in their time they did too, but we certainly categorize humans based upon their color and their hair and their physical appearance as much, if not more, than we categorize animals.
Yeah,
certainly dogs. I mean, we breeds and that kind of stuff, but it seems like especially in America in modern times, you're judged by your color of your skin as opposed to anything else.
Yeah,
put into categories, if you will. Anyway, that's my deep thought on Avicenna's.
Yes, and there's just one more point about Avicenna's kind of metaphysics here, is that he states that there's no actualization without individuation. So just because, there is something that is common between, all horses, there has to be an individual horse to exist for that thing to actually exist. Because this idea of horseness is really only a potential, in that it is common between all horses, but it's not a thing in and of itself. We cannot achieve a horseness out in actual being.
Without an actual horse.
Without an actual
horse. There's no horseness
yes.
without horse.
Yes.
Yes. I agree with that. I don't know what the value of that is as far as understanding the world, but I guess there's some things you just have to state and articulate. That's one of them.
Yes.
Moving on to Aquinas on actuality and potentiality.
This is kind of what I was talking about just a little bit ago about, what kind of separates us as humans. And Aquinas uses this word habitus, or disposition in a way, and that's these certain common aspects of humanity, such as virtue, our knowledge of language, of logic and science, possession of concepts, that sort of thing. And he states that disposition is halfway between concept and action, in that he uses kind of the example that, I could say that man speaks French, but I'm not necessarily saying that he is actively speaking French right now, nor am I saying that he has the ability to speak French. He is just a man who has an understanding of French, and that is kind of what his disposition is. And that can be applied basically to all people with basically all of their individual traits in a way.
Right. It's almost like kind of a proto-virtue or like morality. It's not quite there. It's qualities, I guess you'd say.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But he uses virtue as one of those qualities.
Right.
And that he again uses a different example, like that man is generous. Doesn't necessarily mean he's doing something generous right now, nor does it mean that he has the potential to do something generous. He's just a generous person. That is his disposition.
Yeah, it's like his quality.
Yes.
His essence, in a way.
In a way. But then...
But it could change.
Yes. But it can change, yes.
Give me that money back.
Yes.
Get a job.
And so then Aquinas then kind of talks about bodily activities in a way. He says that bodily activities are either subject to voluntary control or not, and if not, they are simply natural and need no disposition.
So I guess if you have an experience at the Waffle House, then your bodily disposition may not be controllable. But if you don't go there, maybe you decide when it happens.
That's disgusting.
Isn't that what he's saying? I was actually expecting some sort of poop reference.
That's
when I thought, oh, well, actually get to some sort of bodily function reference here, but he kind of danced around it, so to speak.
a little bit.
Kind of like waiting for the bathroom at the Waffle House.
So he's kind of saying like basically any action we actively choose to do is part of our disposition. So it's like my heart beating is not part of my disposition because that's common to all humans, but my decision to maybe run a marathon, that would be part of my disposition. I could call myself a marathon runner. Right. That is my disposition.
It's funny that he thinks it's an odd, the author, Mr. Kenny, thinks it's an odd reference that running a marathon is similar disposition as somebody who can speak Hebrew is his example. And I guess Mr. Kenny's not a runner because that's an intellectual exercise, probably more than learning Hebrew. Well, maybe not so, but it is. I mean, it's a mental as well as physical thing. As somebody who has completed a marathon, it's some sort of disposition that causes you to do such a foolish thing.
Yeah, so it's kind of like that's basically the what essentially a disposition is. It's somewhat of an action, somewhat of a concept, but it's midway between the two.
Right.
And then he kind of uses this sort of idea of accidents. Aristotle's idea of accidents, and accidents are sort of qualities that something has. And Aquinas uses this idea of accidents in transubstantiation. And so transubstantiation is the Catholic belief that in the Eucharist, with the body or the bread and wine becomes the actual body and blood of Jesus. But of course, during the Mass, those things don't actually change their qualities. They still look like bread and wine, but we believe that they are actually, Jesus's body and blood. And he uses this idea of accidents by saying that the accidents of bread and wine are still there. They're still present. It still looks like bread, still looks like wine. They still have the same, qualities of bread and wine, but they exist without substance because the substance of that matter has completely changed to be the body and blood of Jesus Christ. And that's basically how the transubstantiation works, is that the accidents of bread and wine are still there, but the actual substance is the body and blood of Jesus Christ.
Yeah, I don't know about this. What do you think about that? Do you like that?
I don't know.
I don't know why they use the word accidents, because accident to me is like a fall or a random occurrence.
Yeah, it's just something that Aristotle used at one point, and then everybody decided to use it and get confused.
Yeah, I don't really. Do you share my concern with the use of that word?
Yes, I do.
All right, because it seems to me
it can kind of just be replaced with qualities or something that it is of, basically.
Or almost like an essence, I would think is a better word, but it's kind of different than that.
Yeah, they really tied down weird things to different words, right. Especially here.
Which was always my beef with philosophy. So much of it is just about syntax, about words and the meaning of words, and you just go down these paths about how do you define stuff, and it's a lot of talking about something rather than actually explaining what it is or what the concepts are of it.
Yes.
Anyway, moving along.
So then he kind of talks about creation a little bit. In kind of the framework of forms with the sort of deal here. I'll just read this little section. He says, creation is one way of coming into being. What coming into being amounts to depends on what being is. So those things properly come into being and are created, which properly have being, and those are subsistent objects. That to which being properly belongs is that which has being, and that is a subsistent thing with its own being. Forms and accidents and the like are called beings not because they themselves are, but because by them something else is what it is. Thus whiteness is only called a being because by it something is white. That is why Aristotle says that an accident is not so much is, but is of. So accidents and forms and the like, which do not subsist, are rather coexistent than existent, and likewise they should be called concreated rather than created. What really gets created are subsistent entities. So this is kind of another breakdown of basically what being is, because here he also says, similar to Avicenna's idea of hoarseness, Aquinas would kind of say that is a being in and of itself, hoarseness is, but it is not the same being as you and I are beings, because we are subsistent beings, we are dependent on something else, or we are not dependent on something else. We exist physically, but the other types of things, forms and accidents, are entirely dependent on something else existing for them to exist. Right? Hoarseness is dependent on there being a horse. Whiteness is depending on there being something that is white. So that which is created, like us and basically the world, is a different type of being than qualities, although qualities still are a being in of themselves.
It's a good explanation.
Thank you. I'm surprised you didn't just say yes.
Actually, I was going to make a reference to women of ill repute and the quality of hoarseness. Oh, that's a little different word.
Yeah,
sorry,
a little bit.
I got confused there.
Yeah. All right. And so,
would you have rather me just say yes?
a little bit of me wanted you to just say yes there.
Are we on to Duns Scotus? Are you still on?
I just wanted to mention one last thing about Aquinas.
You said you already, it was the last thing, but go ahead.
He mentions that existence is separate from essence, and that something, we can understand the essence of something without it actually existing. He uses the example of a phoenix. I can understand what a phoenix is. Of course, a phoenix will never exist, has never existed, but I can understand the concept of it. That is what its essence is. I know what it is without it actually being present.
Right.
Yes.
It's a good distinction.
Yes. All right. The Metaphysics of Duns Scotus.
Scotus?
Scotus?
I say Scotus.
Scotus. So he gets into a lot of different terms and things, which is a little unfortunate. A lot of this is just bogged down in...
Sorry, I just hit something.
Yes.
Let's grab the wire.
Big spike on the recording there. And
that
so
was just the interest in the topic for all of our listeners.
And so we won't go into
cheering.
we won't go into too much detail in Duns Scotus because a lot of the actual next section kind of breaks down what is wrong with Duns Scotus with Occam. But one of the first things that Duns Scotus believes is that reason is impotent to prove God is omnipotent. So he kind of says that we can't really know that God exists through reason alone. And then he also breaks down being, saying that every being is actual or potential, finite or infinite, necessary or contingent. So that's basically everything that is being, essentially, because every single thing that has ever existed and will ever exist fits into those categories.
Yeah, this also had this concept of synchronic contingency.
Yes, this was very interesting. This is probably the most interesting part of this section.
I thought it was an interesting concept where, it's like the example, you could be one of two things or one of multiple things at the same time. Not that you can be them in actuality, but like, for instance, I'm sitting in this chair, I could have been standing. Mm-hmm. And so I had the potential, but of course the actual, I can only do one at a time. But, and so he's just talking about the different possibilities that could exist, but only one did exist, I guess. And
so it's kind of similar to like the modern theory of, multiple universes, in that there are, possible worlds out there that, follow the same rules of physics basically, but there's just changes that are made basically by free will. Like you said, there is a possibility where I'm standing right now as opposed to sitting. And that's, not dependent really on anything else just besides my decision to stand or sit. It is still a possibility. Still a potentiality.
Do you believe in multiple universes?
I don't think so.
Yeah, I don't either. Yeah. I think it's a bunch of BS. Like a parallel universe where there's like an evil Superman. What do they call it? Bizarro world. Yes.
Yeah. I don't think a Bizarro world exists.
I think the only world that exists is Bizarro world. I don't think that the real world exists. I think this is Bizarro
We're all
world.
in Bizarro world?
Have you looked around? should I go on a rant? I'm about to go on a rant.
No, I don't think you should go on a rant. And so
because I have a whole transgendered rant. Whenever you're ready for it.
I don't think this is the time or place for that.
Right, I guess that's a little off topic.
Yeah. And so kind of the last thing.
That'll be our next series. We're going to do an entire podcast series on just transgenderism and gender dysphoria or whatever those concepts are.
All right.
It'll be 52 episodes. And you won't get to speak in any of them.
Oh, right. So I'll just be a silent observer. Yes. All right. So the last thing I just wanted to mention about Duns Scotus, we're kind of skipping over a lot here because a lot of it's just kind of unimportant to me personally.
It was very important to Duns Scotus.
It sure was. He wrote a lot about it.
And I was surprised there was so much effort by Mr. Kenny to detail his views, but it was interesting.
Mm-hmm. A lot of it's interesting, but not really necessary going forward, I think.
Almost like it was a debate between philosophers of the time. So, so it's relevant for a discussion of the history of philosophy, I guess.
The last thing I wanted to mention, he had this idea of hyacity, which is sort of thisness, which is the ultimate reality of a being and what really individuates people. So it's kind of separate from our essence, separate from our existence. It's kind of the relation between our essence and our existence, and that is what individualizes us, separates us from other humans.
Yes.
All right. Moving on to Occam.
Yeah, his reductive program.
Yes, and I know you did not like Occam at all. The reading before last.
Yeah, I didn't care.
Because he had the mental language,
right,
which I thought was fascinating. But yeah, I really like Occam here. And so Occam's big principle, basically it's, there's a falsely attributed quote to him that says, entities are not to be multiplied beyond necessity, which isn't actually a thing he said. But what he did actually say was that it is futile to do with many what can be done with few. So he's
true that.
Yes. So I thought that I was reading this and I'm like, this is absolutely what you believe.
Yes.
That, there's just so many unnecessary things, so many unnecessary terms. You can break it down much, much simpler than everybody else's.
Yes.
And so that's exactly what he does.
Cutting the wheat from the chaff.
Yes. And so basically his first principle is that all that exists is individualized. Nothing needs to be individuated because everything that exists is already an individual. You don't have to argue about the qualities of things. You don't have to argue about universality.
Right.
Because I can look at what's in front of me. I can tell that that's an individual because there's nothing else like it. It is just what it is.
Correct.
It is an individual. We don't have to have a separate hyacity to individualize us.
We don't need a horseness universality. Mm-hmm. There's a bunch of horses.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah, a bunch of individual horses. He does say that there are, of course, common qualities between things. That's kind of how we define them. You have to describe them, but
there's a bunch of horses.
No,
but look at each one of them. They're all different.
Yes, but there's no inherent state of being that is horseness. There's just common things between all individual horses.
Yeah, common qualities of horses.
Yes.
That's right.
Then
there's no horseness. In and of itself, separate from the individual horses,
yes,
right?
You're getting very angry about this horseness. And so then he also states that only substances and qualities are real. So basically in all of these, there's a list of like 10 accidents that Aristotle described. Some of them were like quantity, basically just different breakdowns of sort of what things are. And he basically says only substance and quality really needs to exist. There's nothing else that is of use beyond that. And then he also says that quantity really doesn't matter when you're defining what something is, basically the essence of something. Because basically a lot of philosophers at the time believed that quantity was necessary to determine, the essence of something. So it's like, well, what about, for example, a lump of iron that you put in and it's 80 centimeters long, but you put it into the fire and it expands to 90 centimeters. Is that a completely different set of iron, block of iron? Is that something completely different? Does it have its own new essence? And he's like, well, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, and I really like that argument. It's practical, but it also explains the concept that it's the same thing, just a little bit different, but it's the same essence.
Yes, exactly.
I like it.
And then he also kind of talks about relation, basically because a lot of people believe that, again, relation was a separate entity, just as quantity was a separate entity. And he basically states that if relation were a real entity that physically exists, it could exist on its own. So, for example, you are my father, I am your son.
I am your father.
Yes, thank you. Is that Star Wars? Yeah.
That's not the Lord of the Rings.
Yeah, okay.
It was a good movie that was entertaining.
Wow. See, as you're drinking out of a Lord of the Rings mug.
Well, you make a lot of compromises when you have children.
Wow. All right, so he basically says that with relation, so if relation were a separate entity from everything, if it were its own thing, it could exist without, me existing. But if I didn't exist, then your relation to me would not exist. So relation isn't its own separate thing. Without me, you would not be my father, basically.
Yes.
Yes.
I don't know. You want me to say anything more about that?
I don't know.
I can't get, and I'll let you tell me if it's appropriate or not. The whole discussion of hoarseness has got a limerick in my mind that I learned when I was younger than your youngest brother, and it's just a dirty little limerick. Do you want to hear it?
I don't know if I do. If our listeners out there, if there's an abrupt cut right here, you'll know.
You will not like it. It's disgusting. It's what do you call it? what do you call it when you say something really sexist and demeaning to women?
Misogynist?
Yes. Misogynist. Thank you. Maybe we'll save it for after hours.
Okay. Okay, so stay tuned to the end of the episode. I don't know if any of our listeners noticed this, but I always put in a little something after the final outro music, just our final wrapping up thoughts.
And if you don't approve of it, you can cut it out and just leave your reaction. We'll have I'll start it,
yes,
and then you can cut it, and then you can have your reaction. And I guarantee you it'll be a negative reaction. Although with some nervous giggling.
Something to look forward to.
It starts off. Do you want me to? Okay.
No, we'll save that to the very end.
We'll go to Wycliffe.
I just wanted to mention one last thing that Occam points out. He also basically disproves likeness. There's this other idea of likeness being a real entity, basically saying that, this whiteness, if I paint a wall white, it is like this other white wall in Rome. But he kind of says that if likeness were its own separate thing, then painting a white wall in Rome would necessitate the existence of a white wall right here that I am painting, and so likeness is not its own separate entity. Okay. Now we can move on to Wycliffe.
Wycliffe and determinism.
Yes. And so he believed that all things happen by absolute necessity. Jinx. Yeah.
And you know what? He might be right. There'd be no way to know he's wrong.
Yeah, I guess so.
Because if you decide that he was right or you decide he was wrong, that was already determined.
Yeah.
It's a beautiful theory. Hard determinism.
It's also almost the same argument, basically, by saying that it is necessary for something to exist because it does exist. Therefore, it is necessary for it to exist. It's kind of that same argument, right? Yes. If I make a decision, it is necessary for it to exist because it did exist.
That's correct.
Yes.
And that is true.
Yes. And so he kind of didn't want to be known as a determinist.
He also got condemned, by the way.
Got condemned, yes. By the way, yes. Of course. Most people were. So basically, he kind of trapped himself in a problem, and I'm going to kind of read these two sections here. It says that just as no one can prevent the world's having been, so no one can prevent any effect coming to be at the appropriate time. For the following argument is valid. God ordains A, therefore A will necessarily come to pass at the appropriate time. The antecedent is outside any created power and is accordingly altogether unpreventable. Therefore, so is everything which formally follows from it. So basically he's stating that because the universe exists, because everything was set into motion, it is impossible for us to act against that which is set in motion, basically by God's will.
Right.
But he kind of tried to solve this problem and still give humans some sort of free will. So he says that, on this, it is to be noted that the volition of God, with respect to the existence of a creature, can be understood as a relationship, a mental entity with its basis in God's willing the thing to be in accordance with its mental being, which is something absolutely necessary, with its terminus in the existence of the creature in its own kind. And such a relationship depends on each of the terms, since if God is to will that Peter or some other creature should be, it is requisite that it should in fact be. And thus the existence of the creature, even though it is temporal, causes in God an eternal mental relationship, which is always in process of being caused, and yet is always completely caused. So basically what he's saying here is that we are almost necessary for God's existence, in a way. And that he's stating that for God to have this relationship with us, for God to have this ability to, engage with us, we have to exist. You look confused. Is that
No, keep going. Keep going. I don't mean to distract you
Yes.
with me looking concerned.
Yes, and so basically by our own existence, we are necessary for that relationship to be formed, because the relationship has to go both ways. And so with that, for God to have created us, it is necessary for us to already be created in a way. We have to already exist kind of our own accord in a way.
You got that from this?
I think so. What did you get from this?
I was trying to reread it because I got that once he created us, then there's a relationship,
Yes.
and our existence could cause him to basically change what was preordained. That's what I read it
Oh,
as.
okay. Yeah.
And so basically we could affect the outcome by how we react to what he preordained in the first place, which I just think is a bunch of... Now, I don't think he was saying that we are necessary for God's existence.
Yeah.
I think he's trying to shoehorn in some sort of free will or how we can influence the outcome.
Yeah.
And I view it as very similar to like the Greek gods, like the fates would say such and such, and that you're fated to have this outcome, but somehow you can through valiant effort, you may be able to change the fates or alter the outcome at the end. And I think that's kind of what he's trying
that makes
to
more sense than what I was saying.
Trying to say what's a relationship, so it's a back and forth relationship. So it may change what he determines you're going to do, which is I guess all well and good, but it kind of loses its purity when you think that everything's determined by God already.
Mm-hmm. It can also kind of be made a case for determinism again in the first place, because he says that it has to be an eternal, like, mental relationship with God, basically. But if that relationship is eternal, it's always existed, always has existed. So God knows the bounds of that relationship.
Right.
So it's like, well, what can you do?
Yeah, and there's this temptation to try to acknowledge the physical causes that cause us to do certain things, or things that are happening around us or to us or by us. And there's a lot of physical reasons why things happen. You have a panic reaction to a sudden event, and it's biological. And there's always this push-pull between, okay, what's the physical, what's the mental, what is your choice, what is a reaction, what is determined, and what is free will.
Kind of Aquinas' definition of disposition.
Right.
And that our own, voluntary actions, that makes up our disposition. That's what makes us individual. Like I said, marathon runner, you are a marathon runner. You chose to run that marathon. That was not involuntary.
Right.
Yes.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, I have a lot of respect for people that believe in determinism and that argue with people about it, because what's the point?
Yeah.
It has already been determined whether you're going to convince them or not.
Yes.
So why are you bothering? What does it matter?
Very fatalist. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if you really believe in determinism, it's depressing and liberating at the same time.
Yeah.
You have no responsibility for anything.
Yeah.
And all that.
Mm-hmm.
So he's trying to cop out and get some free will in there somehow, and
yes.
I don't see how that works. It just doesn't. I think they're contradictory.
Mm-hmm.
It's either one or the other, or you can have a blended theory where some of what you do is determined, which it's like the nature nurture thing, and what your free will is in that mix.
Yeah. All right. Well, that was the last section of that reading. Pretty short episode we have here.
All right, so I think I should tell you my limerick.
Well, we should sign off first, and then you can
okay.
tell me later.
All right,
so this
very
has
good.
been episode 16 of Unlimited Opinions. I've been Adam Bishop.
I am still Mark Bishop.
And you can follow us on Twitter and tweet at us to win a free t-shirt, capital U, LMTD, capital O, Opinions. Oh my God.
And I can't remember who told that to me, but I was just aghast. It was just so horrible. And then it rhymes, and I always wondered who wrote that, and now that I remember it, and that was like 40 years ago that was told to me, and it still occurs to me anytime I hear horse.
That may be cut. So that may be cut out of there. That's all right.
Isn't it awful?
It's terrible.
It is terrible. And your mother would be very disappointed that I shared that with you. She'd be disappointed that I listened to the whole thing when I was a kid, and that I repeated it to my son.
Yes.
And she is right to do so.
All right. Well, that's it for today.
I think we're going to edit that out.